The auction hall reeked of desperation and exotic oils. Commander Zethkar's 4 eyes scanned the merchandise with practiced indifference, his chitinous fingers drumming against the energy bidding pad. As a decorated officer of the hegemony's Third Fleet, he had earned the right to own rare specimens from conquered worlds. Today, he sought something unique for his private collection. "Next lot," announced the auctioneer, a thin Vorthan whose translator crackled with static. One female human, approximately 23 standard cycles. Captured during the pacification of Sol. 3. Observed the unusual coloring. The containment field shimmered, revealing a young woman with auburn hair and defiant green eyes. Unlike the broken specimens typically paraded through these halls, this one stood straight, her chin raised despite the neural suppression collar around her neck. Her skin held a healthy glow that suggested she had been well maintained during transport. Zethkar leaned forward with mild interest. Humans had become somewhat fashionable among the hegemony's elite since Earth's recent subjugation. They were considered intelligent enough to provide interesting companionship while remaining manageable through proper conditioning. The advertisements claimed they could be trained for various entertainment purposes. Bidding starts at 500 credits, the auctioneer continued. This specimen shows remarkable resilience. Note the minimal conditioning required to maintain docility. The human's eyes swept across the crowd of alien buyers, and, for a moment, they locked with Zethkar's. Instead of the vacant stare he expected from a properly processed slave, he saw something that made his secondary hearts skip a beat. Intelligence. Sharp, calculating intelligence that seemed to take his measure in that brief exchange. 600, called out a Melkari trader from the front row. The insectoid creature's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Zethkar found himself raising his pad. 1,000. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was an aggressive opening bid for what most considered a mid-tier acquisition. The human tilted her head slightly, studying him with those remarkable eyes. 1,500, countered a voice from the back. Zethkar turned to see Overlord Haskath, a notorious collector known for his cruel treatment of exotic pets. The sight of the bloated Gornian's leering expression made Zethkar's mandibles clench. 3,000. Zethkar responded without hesitation. He told himself it was merely to deny Hasketh the prize, but something deeper drove his bid. The auction hall fell silent. 3,000 credits could purchase a small warship or fund a minor military campaign. For a single human slave, it was unprecedented. Any further bids? The auctioneer's voice pitched higher with excitement. When silence greeted his question, he brought down his ceremonial hammer. Sold to Commander Zethkar of the Third Fleet. As the crowd dispersed, discussing the shocking final price, Zethkar approached the holding area. The human watched his approach with wariness, but no fear. Up close, he could see the subtle musculature that suggested combat training, the slight calluses on her hands that spoke of weapons practice. "What is your designation, human?" he asked in Standard Galactic, curious whether she had been taught the common tongue. "My name is Sarah Chun," she replied in accented but clear Standard. "I was a lieutenant in the Earth Defense Corps before your people murdered my unit and burned my world." Zethkar's translator converted her words, but something in her tone needed no translation. Grief mixed with barely contained fury. Most slaves were conditioned to remove such dangerous emotions. Either this one's processing had been incomplete, or she possessed remarkable mental resilience. "You will address me as master," he said, activating a remote that would send corrective pulses through her collar if she disobeyed. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, master." The slight pause before the title told him everything he needed to know about her true feelings. This would be interesting indeed. The transport to his estate took 3 standard hours. During the journey, Zethkar found himself studying his new acquisition. Sarah sat perfectly still in the passenger restraints, her gaze fixed on the viewport showing the approach to his homeworld of Kepler Prime. The planet's twin suns cast golden light across her features, highlighting the determination etched in every line of her face. "Tell me about Earth," he said suddenly. She turned to look at him, suspicion clear in her expression. "Why?" "Curiosity. I have heard conflicting reports about your world's capabilities." Some claim humans fought well despite inferior technology. Others suggest your resistance was negligible. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. We held out for 6 months against the entire hegemony fleet. When your admirals realized they couldn't break our orbital defenses quickly, they resorted to planetary bombardment of civilian targets. Billions died because we wouldn't surrender. Zethkar had read the official reports, which painted the human resistance as brief and ineffective. The casualty figures Sarah mentioned were significantly higher than anything in the military briefings. Either she was lying to inflate her species' importance, or the hegemony had understated their losses. You were a military officer? Electronic warfare specialist. I designed countermeasures for your jamming systems. Pride crept into her voice despite her circumstances. My modifications let 3 of our destroyers break through your blockade and reach the outer colonies before. She trailed off, jaw clenching as if she had said too much. Before what? Before they were hunted down and destroyed. Every ship, every crew member. All because I couldn't make my systems work fast enough. Her voice dropped to a whisper filled with self-recrimination. Zethkar filed away the information. The official reports claimed no human vessels had escaped the siege of Earth. If Sarah spoke truthfully, then the hegemony military had either been incompetent or had deliberately concealed significant intelligence failures. His estate materialized ahead of them as the transport cleared the final ridge. Sprawling across several hilltops, the compound represented generations of military service and conquest. Gardens filled with specimens from dozens of worlds created a living museum of hegemony expansion. At the center rose his primary residence, its crystalline spires catching and fracturing the light of both suns. "Welcome to your new home," Zethkar said as they settled onto the landing pad. Sarah said nothing, but her hands clenched into fists as she took in the obvious wealth and power on display. The next several days established their routine. Sarah was assigned quarters in the servants' wing, a comfortable suite that was nonetheless locked from the outside. Her collar monitored her location constantly and would deliver escalating corrections if she ventured into restricted areas. Zethkar found himself spending more time than usual in his private study, often summoning Sarah to discuss various topics. Initially, he told himself he was simply evaluating his investment, learning about human culture and capabilities. But their conversations gradually became the highlight of his daily schedule. "Your people call this music," he said one evening, activating a holographic display that showed sound wave patterns from intercepted Earth transmissions. "Explain its purpose." Sarah studied the visualizations with professional interest. Despite her situation, her curiosity seemed genuine. It's emotional communication. These patterns create responses in our neural chemistry: joy, sadness, excitement. We use it for entertainment, ritual, memory preservation. Fascinating. The hegemony employs sonic frequencies for crowd control and psychological conditioning. Your species appears to have developed similar technology for recreational purposes. "We don't call it technology," Sarah corrected. "Music is art. It comes from the heart, not a laboratory." Zethkar's translator struggled with several of her words, particularly heart, in its emotional context. His species possessed 4 cardiac organs for blood circulation, but the concept of associating emotion with circulatory function seemed bizarre. "Show me," he said impulsively. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Show you what?" "This heart music. Create some for me to analyze." She shook her head slowly. "I can't just manufacture music on command. It requires inspiration, feeling, and I'm not exactly in an inspired mood lately." The comment was technically insubordinate, but Zethkar found himself more intrigued than offended. "What would inspire you?" For a long moment, Sarah studied his face as if trying to determine whether the question was genuine. Finally, she said, "Freedom, hope, beauty that isn't built on conquest and suffering." Her words carried a weight that made Zethkar's secondary hearts flutter uncomfortably. He dismissed her with a gesture that was perhaps sharper than necessary. That night, alone in his chambers, he found himself reviewing recordings of their conversations. Sarah's facial expressions, her vocal inflections, the way she moved her hands while speaking. Everything about her communication style differed dramatically from other species in his collection. Whereas other acquisitions had learned to please him with practiced subservience, Sarah challenged him with her very existence. The realization disturbed him. A good commander maintained emotional distance from his resources. Attachment led to weakness, and weakness invited disaster in the unforgiving hierarchy of hegemony society. Yet something about this human's fierce spirit called to parts of himself he had buried long ago. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Overlord Hasketh's bloated features materialized in the communication sphere above his desk. Zethkar, my friend, I trust your expensive new pet is providing adequate entertainment. She serves her purpose, Zethkar replied carefully. Hasketh's sudden interest seemed suspicious. Excellent. I have been researching human capabilities since your dramatic acquisition. It seems your specimen may possess valuable technical knowledge. Several of my associates would be willing to pay handsomely for access to her expertise. The suggestion made Zethkar's claws extend involuntarily. She is not for sale or rent. Of course. But consider the profits, my friend. Humans are remarkably fragile. Your investment will depreciate rapidly under normal use. Better to extract maximum value while the merchandise remains functional. Hasketh's image vanished, leaving Zethkar staring at the empty communication sphere. The Overlord's words carried an implicit threat wrapped in economic logic. In hegemony society, resources that could benefit the empire belonged ultimately to the state. Personal ownership was a privilege that could be revoked if higher authorities deemed it necessary. The next morning, Zethkar found Sarah in the gardens, sitting beside a fountain that featured water samples from 17 different worlds. She had been given basic maintenance duties to occupy her time, but today she simply sat motionless, staring at the flowing water. You seem troubled, he observed. I'm a prisoner on an alien world, owned by a species that destroyed my home. Trouble doesn't begin to cover it. She didn't look up as she spoke. Zethkar settled onto a nearby bench, studying her profile. Tell me about your family. The question seemed to surprise her. Why? Curiosity about human social structures. Sarah was quiet for so long that he thought she might refuse to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the fountain's murmur. My parents were engineers. They designed the defensive platforms that protected Earth's orbital shipyards. When your fleet arrived, they volunteered to stay behind and operate the systems manually after the automated controls were compromised. She paused, swallowing hard. The platforms kept firing until the very end. My parents died at their posts. Zethkar felt something twist in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that his translator couldn't categorize. They fought bravely. They fought hopelessly, Sarah corrected. They knew they couldn't win, but they fought anyway because surrender meant slavery for everyone they loved. Because sometimes principle matters more than survival. Her words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Zethkar had built his career on the principle that survival justified any action. Victory validated every strategy, no matter how ruthless. Yet this human spoke of choosing death over compromise as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. Do you share their philosophy? He asked quietly. Sarah finally turned to meet his gaze. What do you think? That evening, alone in his study, Zethkar accessed classified military records about the siege of Earth. What he found contradicted nearly every detail in the official reports. Human resistance had been far more effective than publicly acknowledged. The hegemony had lost thousands of ships and millions of personnel during the 6-month campaign. Several entire fleets had been forced to withdraw and regroup after suffering crippling losses to human defensive systems. Most disturbing were the reports of human tactical innovations developed during the siege. Their adaptive strategies and rapid technological improvements had caught hegemony commanders completely off guard. By the final weeks of the conflict, human forces were inflicting casualty ratios that approached parity despite their massive disadvantages in resources and numbers. The war had ended not through military victory, but through systematic targeting of civilian population centers. When the humans realized their families were being slaughtered by the millions, their resistance had finally broken. The official records painted this strategy as efficient and decisive. Reading them now, with Sarah's words fresh in his mind, Zethkar found them disturbing in ways he couldn't fully articulate. A new message indicator flashed on his personal terminal. This time the sender was Admiral Korithmar, Supreme Commander of the Third Fleet, and Zethkar's direct superior. The elderly warrior's scarred features showed no emotion as he delivered his message. Commander Zethkar, it has come to my attention that you possess a human with significant technical knowledge. Report to my flagship at your earliest convenience for debriefing on this asset's potential military applications. End transmission. Zethkar stared at the empty screen for a long time. Korithmar's request was actually an order that could not be refused or delayed. Worse, the Admiral's interest meant that Sarah's situation had attracted attention from the highest levels of hegemony command structure. He found her in her quarters, reading from a datapad containing translated human literature, a small privilege he had granted after noting her intellectual curiosity. She looked up as he entered, immediately sensing something wrong in his expression. "What is it?" she asked. "My superiors have learned of your technical background. They wish to interview you about human military capabilities." Sarah set down the pad slowly. "You mean they want to torture information out of me?" Zethkar's silence was answer enough. Sarah stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the alien landscape painted silver by the twin moons. "How long do I have?" "We depart for the fleet rendezvous in 18 hours. She nodded without turning around. "Will you be present during the questioning?" "I will escort you to the flagship, yes." "That wasn't what I asked." Zethkar found himself struggling with an emotion he couldn't name. "I do not know if I will be permitted to observe the proceedings." Sarah finally faced him, and he saw no fear in her expression, only a quiet resignation that somehow made him feel worse than terror would have. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For treating me like a person instead of property. It made these last few weeks more bearable than I expected." The gratitude in her voice felt like a physical blow. Zethkar opened his mouth to respond, then closed it without speaking. What could he say? That he had begun to question everything he believed about his own civilization? That her courage had awakened something in him that he didn't understand? That the thought of delivering her to interrogation made him feel like a traitor to his own conscience? Instead, he simply nodded and left her to spend what might be her final night in relative peace. As he lay in his chambers that night, staring at the ceiling while his world's twin moons cast shifting shadows through the crystal walls, Zethkar found himself at a crossroads he had never imagined possible. Everything in his training and culture demanded that he deliver Sarah to his superiors without question. The needs of the hegemony superseded individual concerns, and his duty as an officer was absolute. But somewhere in the weeks since bringing her to his estate, Sarah had ceased to be merely property in his mind. Her intelligence, her courage, her unwavering principles, they had transformed her into something unprecedented in his experience. She had become not just a human, but a person whose fate mattered to him in ways that defied rational analysis. The conflict between duty and conscience would soon force him to choose between the life he had always known and a path he couldn't yet see. As the night deepened around his estate, Zethkar began to understand that tomorrow would change everything for both of them. The hegemony flagship Inevitable Conquest hung in space like a massive predator, its hull bristling with weapons that could shatter planets. As Zethkar's transport approached the docking bay, he felt Sarah tense beside him despite her efforts to maintain composure. The neural suppression collar around her neck hummed softly, ready to deliver corrections if her stress levels triggered its sensors. "Remember," Zethkar said quietly, "answer their questions directly, but volunteer nothing additional. Admiral Korithmar values efficiency above creativity." Sarah's green eyes met his through the viewport's reflection. "Are you giving me advice on how to resist interrogation?" The question made Zethkar pause. Was he? The tactical part of his mind insisted he was simply protecting a valuable asset by preventing her from antagonizing her questioners unnecessarily. But another part, a part that had grown stronger over recent weeks, whispered different truths about his motivations. "I am ensuring you survive long enough to serve your intended purpose," he said finally. "And what purpose is that?" Before he could answer, the transport settled into the flagship's docking bay with a metallic clang that seemed to echo through both their chests. Admiral Korithmar's ready room was a monument to conquest. Trophy weapons from defeated species lined the walls, while holographic displays showed the ever-expanding borders of hegemony space. The Admiral himself was a towering figure whose carapace bore scars from countless battles. His four eyes fixed on Sarah with predatory interest as Zethkar led her into the chamber. "So this is the human that cost you 3,000 credits," Korithmar rumbled in the clicking language of their species. "She appears unremarkable." "Appearances can be deceiving, Admiral," Zethkar replied in the same tone. Sarah stood silently between them, her posture straight despite the restraints. Her expression remained neutral, but Zethkar caught the subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested she was calculating distances and possibilities even now. "Indeed they can." The Admiral switched to Standard Galactic, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "Human, you will answer my questions with complete honesty. Any attempt at deception will be punished severely. Do you understand?" "Understand," Sarah replied evenly. "Excellent. Your military designation during the Siege of Earth was Electronic Warfare Specialist, 2nd Class. Describe the countermeasures you developed against our jamming protocols." Sarah met the Admiral's gaze steadily. "I created adaptive, frequency-hopping algorithms that could anticipate pattern shifts in hegemony communication jamming. The system analyzed electromagnetic signatures and predicted the next wavelength in your rotation sequence." Korithmar's mandibles clicked with what Zethkar recognized as pleased surprise. "Impressive. How successful was this technology?" "It increased our tactical communication effectiveness by approximately 37% during the final phase of the siege." "The final phase," the Admiral mused. "When your people became desperate. Tell me about the modifications you made to your defensive platforms during that period." A shadow passed across Sarah's features. "I integrated the counter-jamming systems with point defense targeting computers. It allowed our orbital platforms to coordinate fire more effectively, which resulted in the destruction of the Magnificent Fury and severe damage to 3 other vessels in my battle group," Korithmar said with something that might have been admiration. "Your innovations cost the hegemony considerable resources." Zethkar felt his secondary heart skip. He had not known that Sarah's work had directly influenced battles involving their own fleet. The Admiral's tone suggested professional respect rather than anger, but that could change quickly. "The Magnificent Fury was destroyed by coordinated fire from multiple platforms," Sarah said carefully. "No single modification was responsible." "Modesty ill suits you, human. I have reviewed the tactical analysis. Your frequency-hopping communications allowed the platform commanders to execute a synchronized attack pattern that should have been impossible under our jamming conditions." Korithmar leaned forward, his massive frame casting Sarah in shadow. "Tell me how we can prevent similar coordination among our current enemies." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I won't help you conquer other worlds." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Korithmar's claws extended slowly, scarring the surface of his desk. "You mistake your position, human. You will provide the information I require, or you will suffer until compliance becomes preferable to resistance." "Then I'll suffer." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Zethkar found himself holding his breath as he watched the Admiral's expression shift through several degrees of incredulity and rage. "You would endure agony to protect the enemies of your own species?" Korithmar's voice carried deadly quiet now. "The enemies of my species are sitting in this room," Sarah replied. "I won't help them hurt anyone else." Korithmar rose from his chair, his full height making him loom over the defiant human. "Commander Zethkar, your pet requires education in proper respect. Escort her to detention level 7. Senior Torturer Velkin will adjust her perspective." "Admiral," Zethkar heard himself saying, "perhaps we should consider alternative approaches. The human's technical knowledge is valuable, but torture may damage her cognitive functions." A compromised intellect would provide less useful information. Both Sarah and Korthmar turned to stare at him. The Admiral's expression showed dangerous curiosity. "Are you questioning my methods, Commander?" The question balanced on a knife's edge, challenged the Admiral too directly, and Zethkar would find himself sharing Sarah's fate. But something in her courage had awakened his own buried convictions. "I merely suggest that psychological approaches might prove more effective than physical coercion, sir. The human has demonstrated emotional attachments that could be leveraged more efficiently than pain tolerance." Korthmar studied both of them for a long moment. "Interesting. What emotional attachments do you propose to exploit?" Zethkar felt sweat beating beneath his carapace. He was improvising now, buying time he hoped to use for what? He couldn't even articulate his own intentions. The human has expressed pride in her species' accomplishments and regret for their failure to protect their world. These emotional responses could be manipulated through careful presentation of current human survivor situations. Survivors. Sarah's voice cracked slightly on the word. Korthmar's mandibles curved upward in what passed for a smile among their species. "Yes, human. Did you believe your entire species was exterminated? How inefficient that would be. Approximately 12 million humans survived the siege and subsequent pacification. They now serve the hegemony in various capacities across 17 worlds." Sarah's composure finally cracked. Her hands shook as the full implications hit her. 12 million, she whispered. "Indeed, their fate depends largely on their usefulness to their owners. Cooperative humans live comfortable lives serving valuable functions. Rebellious ones." The Admiral let the implication hang unfinished. "Your cooperation could significantly improve conditions for your surviving people," Zethkar found himself saying. "The information you provide could help the hegemony deal more humanely with occupied populations." Sarah looked at him with something that might have been betrayal or understanding. He couldn't tell which. "You're asking me to help you perfect the enslavement of my own species." "I'm asking you to help me ensure they survive," Zethkar replied, realizing as he spoke that the words were true in ways he hadn't expected. Admiral Korthmar watched this exchange with growing amusement. "Fascinating dynamics. Commander, I believe your suggestion has merit. The human will have 24 hours to consider her position. You will personally oversee her education during this period. Use whatever psychological tools you deem appropriate." "Yes, sir." "And, Commander, if your methods fail to produce results, we will proceed with more traditional approaches. Senior Torturer Velkin does excellent work." Sarah was assigned quarters in the ship's detention section, a sparse but clean cell with basic amenities and constant surveillance. Zethkar found himself with unprecedented access to a military prisoner, a privilege that reflected both the Admiral's trust in his methods and his interest in the results. "Why did you do that?" Sarah asked as soon as the cell door sealed behind them. "Do what?" "Give me hope. Tell me my people are alive. Make me think I can help them." Her eyes blazed with suppressed fury. "Is this part of your psychological manipulation? Build up hope so it hurts more when you crush it." Zethkar activated a small jamming device he normally used for secure communications. The surveillance equipment would show them talking, but their words would be scrambled. "Your people are alive," he said quietly. That part was true. Admiral Korthmar wasn't lying about their survival or their situations. Sarah studied his face intently. But, I cannot guarantee that your cooperation will improve their treatment. The Admiral is interested in your technical knowledge for offensive purposes. Any information you provide will likely be used to conquer additional worlds, creating more slaves rather than freeing existing ones. Then, why did you buy me time? Zethkar found himself struggling with the answer. "I do not know." They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of their situation settling between them. Finally, Sarah moved to the small window that looked out on the star field. "Tell me about your world," she said unexpectedly. "What?" "Kepler Prime. Your estate. What was it like growing up there?" The request seemed surreal given their circumstances. "Why do you wish to know?" "Because in 24 hours, I'll either be tortured to death or become a traitor to my own species. I'd like to spend some of that time thinking about something other than those choices." Zethkar found himself describing his childhood on Kepler Prime, The endless training exercises, the constant competition with his siblings for their father's approval, the slow realization that strength and cunning were the only values that mattered in hegemony society. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally asking questions that revealed an understanding of military culture that transcended species differences. "Your parents were career officers?" she asked. "My father commanded a dreadnought battle group. My mother oversaw strategic planning for the 4th Sector conquest. Military service is the only path to advancement in our society. And you never questioned it? The conquest, the slavery, the destruction of entire civilizations." Zethkar's claws clicked against the cell wall as he considered the question. Question how? Is the natural order. The strong lead, the weak serve. The hegemony brings stability to chaotic systems. Stability, Sarah repeated flatly. Is that what you call it when you turn children into property and force families to watch each other die? Order sometimes requires harsh measures. Harsh measures. Sarah's laugh held no humor. You destroyed my world, killed billions of people, scattered the survivors across the galaxy as slaves. But you call it order because it served your purposes. Your people resisted unnecessarily. The casualties were regrettable, but regrettable. Sarah turned from the window to face him directly. Tell me, Commander, if the hegemony was conquered tomorrow, would you consider your resistance regrettable? If your family was sold to alien masters, would you call their suffering acceptable in the name of order? The questions hit Zethkar like physical blows. In all his years of service, he had never considered the hegemony's actions from the perspective of the conquered. The concept seemed almost treasonous. That scenario is hypothetical, he said finally. Not for me it isn't. Not for 12 million other humans. Not for the billions of other beings your people have enslaved over the centuries. Sarah sat on the narrow bed, her expression weary rather than angry now. I used to think courage meant dying for your principles, throwing yourself on enemy weapons rather than surrendering. But watching my world burn taught me something different, which is sometimes courage means living with compromise, making impossible choices and bearing the weight of them, doing things you hate because the alternatives are worse. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. You're going to ask me to choose between betraying my species and watching them suffer, aren't you? Zethkar felt something cold settle in his chest. The choice will be yours to make. No, it won't. You'll make sure I understand exactly what happens if I refuse. You'll show me recordings of humans being tortured, or threatened, or killed. You'll make it clear that my cooperation is the only thing standing between them and agony. Her understanding of the situation was disturbingly accurate. Would such considerations affect your decision? Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. And that terrifies me more than anything your admiral can do to me. The next 18 hours passed in a strange, suspended state. Zethkar found himself returning to Sarah's cell repeatedly, ostensibly to continue the psychological pressure, but actually to engage in conversations that challenged everything he thought he understood about morality and duty. What did you want to be? Sarah asked during one of these visits. Before the military, when you were young, what did you dream about? Hegemony children don't dream careers, Zethkar replied. We are evaluated and assigned roles based on aptitude and need. But surely you had interests, things that fascinated you. Zethkar found himself remembering long-buried fragments of his youth. I was curious about engineering, the mechanics of how things worked, how they could be improved. But engineering is a support role. My test scores indicated command potential, so I was directed into military leadership tracks. Do you ever regret it? The question was dangerous territory, bordering on criticism of the hegemony's assignment system. Regret serves no purpose. We fulfill the roles we are given. That's not an answer. Zethkar looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder what contributions I might have made to infrastructure or technology instead of conquest. But such thoughts are unproductive. They're human, Sarah said simply. What do you mean? Wondering about alternate paths, imagining different choices. It's one of the things that makes us human, the ability to consider possibilities beyond our current reality. Such thinking leads to dissatisfaction and rebellion. It also leads to growth, progress, innovation. The counter-jamming systems I developed came from imagining possibilities beyond current limitations. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Korithmar himself. The massive officer filled the cell doorway, his scarred carapace gleaming under the harsh lighting. "Commander Zethkar, report on your progress. The human has been responsive to psychological pressure, Admiral. She has indicated willingness to negotiate regarding her cooperation." Korithmar's eyes fixed on Sarah. "Human, you have had time to consider your position. What is your decision?" Sarah stood slowly, meeting the Admiral's gaze with steady determination. "I want to see proof that human survivors are being treated as you claim. I want specific information about their conditions and locations. And I want guarantees about how any information I provide will be used. You are hardly in a position to make demands." "I'm not making demands. I'm establishing the terms under which I might be willing to cooperate. Take them or leave them." Korithmar's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. "Remarkable. Your species' capacity for defiance in hopeless circumstances is noteworthy. Very well. Commander Zethkar, you will escort the human to Intelligence Section 7. Let her see exactly what fate awaits her people if they prove uncooperative." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Zethkar felt a growing sense of dread. Intelligence Section 7 was where the most brutal interrogations took place, where prisoners who refused to break were finally destroyed. If Korithmar was taking Sarah there, it meant her time for decision-making was almost over. "Whatever you see," he said quietly as they approached the section entrance, "remember that you still have choices." Sarah glanced at him with something that might have been gratitude. "So do you, Commander." The doors ahead of them dilated to reveal a corridor lined with cells containing various alien prisoners. And, walking toward them with predatory satisfaction, was Senior Torturer Velkin, his instruments already selected and ready for use. Zethkar realized that the next few minutes would determine not just Sarah's fate, but his own understanding of who he truly was beneath the uniform and conditioning of his upbringing. The path ahead would demand choices that no amount of military training had prepared him to make. Intelligence Section 7 reeked of fear and pain. The corridors were lined with cells containing beings from across the galaxy. Some recent captures still defiant, others broken shells that had forgotten their own names. Senior Torturer Velkin moved through this domain with the satisfaction of a craftsman in his workshop. "Admiral Korithmar has given me a most interesting assignment," Velkin said in his cultured voice that somehow made his words more disturbing than crude threats would have been. "A demonstration of consequences. How educational for our human guest." Sarah walked between Zethkar and the Admiral, her jaw set in grim determination. But Zethkar could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched as they passed cell after cell of broken prisoners. "Here," Velkin announced, stopping before a reinforced door. "Cell 47. I think you'll find this particularly relevant to your current situation." The door dilated to reveal a small chamber containing two figures. Zethkar felt his blood freeze as he recognized what he was seeing. Two humans, a man and woman, both showing signs of prolonged interrogation. The woman looked up as they entered, and her eyes widened with desperate hope. "Sarah," she whispered in heavily accented standard. "Sarah Chun, electronics specialist on Platform 7. Sarah's composure shattered completely. "Maria Santos." "Oh God, Maria, what did they do to you?" The woman in the cell had clearly once been a professional soldier like Sarah, but weeks or months of captivity had left her gaunt and hollow-eyed. Her companion, a young man barely out of his teens, bore burns and scars that spoke of Velkin's particular expertise. "They want technical specifications," Maria said urgently. "The quantum encryption protocols from the Final Defense Network. I've held out, but Tommy..." She looked at the young man with anguish. "They hurt him when I don't answer. They hurt him for what I know." Admiral Korithmar stepped forward, his massive presence filling the small cell. "Miss Santos has been most stubborn about sharing her expertise. Perhaps seeing a fellow human will remind her that cooperation benefits everyone." Sarah's eyes blazed as she looked from Maria to the tortured young man and back to the Admiral. "Let them go." "Certainly." as soon as Miss Santos provides the information we require. Or perhaps you would care to assist. Electronic warfare specialists often work together on critical projects. I don't know anything about quantum encryption, Sarah said through gritted teeth. How disappointing. Korthmar nodded to Velkin, who activated a neural agony inducer. The young man's scream echoed off the cell walls as electricity coursed through his nervous system. Stop! Sarah lunged forward, but was restrained by Zethkar's grip on her arm. The pain stops when we receive useful information, Velkin said calmly. Shall we try again? Miss Santos, the quantum encryption protocols. Maria Santos looked between the writhing young man and Sarah with the expression of someone facing an impossible choice. I can't. The protocols protect evacuation routes. Other survivors depend on them. Velkin increased the inducer's intensity. The young man's screams became inhuman sounds of pure agony. Blood began to seep from his nose and ears as his nervous system overloaded. Enough, Sarah shouted. I'll tell you what you want to know. Just stop hurting him. Sara, no, Maria Guisperth. I can't watch this. Sarah turned to Admiral Korthmar with tears streaming down her face. I'll give you everything. My counter-jamming systems, tactical analysis, defensive protocols. Whatever you want. Just end this. Korthmar gestured to Velkin, who deactivated the torture device. The young man collapsed, twitching and gasping but mercifully unconscious. Excellent. I find that appeals to mercy work far more efficiently than appeals to self-interest. The Admiral's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Commander Zethkar, escort Miss Chun to Technical Analysis Bay 3. I want complete downloads of all relevant information within 6 hours. As they left the detention area, Sarah walked like a woman in a nightmare. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs, and she seemed to have aged years in the span of minutes. You had no choice, Zethkar said quietly as they made their way through the ship's corridors. I had a choice, Sarah replied in a broken voice. I chose to betray everything I fought for because I couldn't bear to watch innocent people suffer for my principles. You chose compassion over ideology. Many would consider that admirable. Sarah stopped walking and rounded on him with fury that made him take a step backward. Don't you dare try to make this sound noble. I just handed your people the tools they need to conquer more worlds, enslave more species, cause more suffering. Every life your improved technology claims from now on is on my head. The Admiral would have extracted the information eventually. Your cooperation simply reduced the immediate suffering. Would he? Maria Santos has been here for weeks without breaking. That boy has endured torture that would break most people, and he didn't reveal anything. Maybe if I'd been stronger, if I'd held out longer, you would have watched more innocent people die for the sake of abstract principles. Yes, Sarah's shout echoed off the corridor walls. Because sometimes abstract principles are all that stands between civilization and barbarism. Because sometimes you have to let people suffer in order to prevent greater suffering. Because sometimes courage means accepting that you can't save everyone. Her words hung between them like an accusation. Zethkar realized that her anger wasn't really directed at him. It was directed at herself, at a universe that forced impossible choices on decent people. Your species fascinates me, he said finally. Why? Because we're stupid enough to torture ourselves over moral compromises. Because you recognize moral compromises as torture. Most species adapt to necessity without such anguish. You seem incapable of accepting that survival sometimes requires abandoning your ideals. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Maybe that's our greatest weakness. Or maybe it's our greatest strength. I can't tell anymore. Technical Analysis Bay 3 was a sterile chamber filled with recording equipment and neural interface devices. Chief Technician YSKF, a spindly being with multiple arms that could operate several systems simultaneously, had prepared a comprehensive scanning array to extract every fragment of useful knowledge from Sarah's mind. The process will take approximately 4 hours, YSKF informed Admiral Korthmar as they entered. I will need to access combat memories, technical training, and theoretical knowledge structures. Some discomfort is unavoidable. Proceed, Korthmar ordered. As Sarah was strapped into the neural interface chair, she looked up at Zeth Carr with an expression that mixed resignation with something that might have been forgiveness. "For what it's worth," she said, "you tried to help. That matters, even if it didn't change anything." The neural scanner activated with a low humming sound. Sarah's body went rigid as the device began mapping her memories and extracting technical knowledge. On the displays around the chamber, information began flowing in complex patterns that would take experts weeks to fully analyze. Zethkar found himself studying the readouts with growing horror. The scanner wasn't just extracting Sarah's knowledge. It was dissecting her mind layer by layer, pulling apart memories and experiences that had shaped her into the person she had become. Her childhood on Earth, her training as an engineer, her desperate fight to defend her world. All of it was being reduced to data points for the hegemony's use. "Fascinating," Admiral Korithmar commented as technical specifications scrolled across the main display. "Her counter-jamming algorithms are more sophisticated than our analysts suspected. And these defensive coordination protocols, they could revolutionize our offensive strategies against dug-in opponents." "Sir," YSKF interjected, "I'm detecting some unusual neural structures. This human appears to have undergone significant psychological conditioning during combat operations. Stress response modifications, enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated learning protocols." "Explain," Korithmar demanded. Her military trained her mind to function under extreme duress and process tactical information at superhuman speeds. These modifications make her knowledge extraction more valuable, but also more dangerous. "Dangerous how?" YSKF's manipulator appendages danced across his controls. "The conditioning creates feedback loops between memory and emotion. As we extract her knowledge, we're also stimulating the traumatic experiences associated with that knowledge. Her stress responses are approaching critical levels." On the chair, Sarah's body began to convulse as the scanner hit memories of Earth's final days. Her screams echoed through the analysis bay as she relived watching her world burn. "Can the process be completed safely?" Admiral Korithmar asked with clinical interest. "Unknown, sir. If we continue at this pace, there's a significant risk of permanent brain damage or death. However, slowing the extraction would reduce the quality of the technical data." Zethkar watched Sarah's face contort in agony as she experienced the destruction of everything she had loved over and over again. Something fundamental shifted inside him, a breaking point he hadn't known existed. "Stop the procedure," he heard himself saying. Every being in the chamber turned to stare at him. Admiral Korithmar's expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and dangerous anger. "Repeat that, Commander." "Stop the procedure, sir. The human's information is valuable, but not at the cost of destroying her cognitive functions. A damaged mind provides corrupted data. Are you questioning my judgment?" The question carried lethal implications. In hegemony hierarchy, challenging a superior's direct orders was tantamount to mutiny. But, looking at Sarah's tortured form, Zethkar found that his own survival mattered less than preventing her destruction. "I'm suggesting that our strategic objectives would be better served by alternative extraction methods, sir." Admiral Korithmar studied him for a long moment, then gestured to YSKF. "Continue the extraction." "Sir, I must protest. Commander Zethkar, you will observe in silence or be removed from this chamber. The decision is yours." Zethkar felt the weight of absolute choice settling on his shoulders. He could remain silent and watch Sarah be mentally destroyed for information that would help the hegemony conquer more worlds. He could continue following orders and maintaining his position within a system he was beginning to recognize as fundamentally corrupt. Or he could act on convictions he was only now discovering he possessed. "Computer," he called out in his command voice, "Emergency Medical Protocol 7. Cease all neural interface operations immediately." The scanning equipment shut down with a series of warning chimes. Sarah's convulsions stopped as the neural probes withdrew from her brain, leaving her unconscious but breathing. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Admiral Korithmar drew his ceremonial blade with deliberate slowness. "Commander Zethkar, You have just committed an act of insubordination that borders on treason. Explain yourself. Zethkar straightened to attention, meeting his superior's gaze steadily. Sir, the extraction process was destroying valuable intelligence assets. Protocol 7 requires immediate cessation of any procedure that threatens critical resource preservation. It was a desperate gambit, invoking emergency protocols to justify his actions. But Admiral Korithmar was a career military officer who understood the importance of preserving strategic assets. Chief Technician YSKF, the Admiral said without taking his eyes off Zethkar. What is the human's current status? Alive, but severely stressed, sir. Neural patterns show significant trauma, but no permanent damage at current levels. If we resumed the extraction immediately, we could still obtain approximately 60% of the available data. And if we waited for her to recover, full recovery would take several days. But we could then extract nearly 100% of the information without risking the subject's cognitive functions. Admiral Korithmar sheathed his blade slowly. Commander Zethkar, your concern for resource preservation is noted. However, your methods of expressing that concern violated command protocol in a manner I will not tolerate again. Understood, sir. The human will be returned to secure quarters for recovery. You will personally oversee her medical treatment and preparation for resumed extraction in 72 hours. During that time, you will consider whether your loyalty lies with efficient resource management or misplaced emotional attachments. The Admiral's words carried clear warning. Zethkar had bought Sarek 3 days of respite, but at the cost of marking himself as potentially unreliable in his superior's eyes. In a rigid hierarchy of hegemony society, such suspicion could end careers or lives. As medical technicians prepared Sarah for transport to recovery quarters, she briefly regained consciousness. Her eyes found Zethkar's across the chamber, and she mouthed 2 words that hit him with surprising force. Thank you. Later, alone in his temporary quarters aboard the flagship, Zethkar found himself analyzing the day's events with the same tactical precision he brought to military campaigns. By any objective measure, his actions had been irrational. He had risked his career, his standing, and potentially his life to prevent further suffering of a member of a conquered species. Yet for the first time in his adult life, he felt as if he had acted in accordance with principles that meant something beyond personal advancement or species loyalty. Sarah's courage in the face of impossible choices had awakened something in him that he was only beginning to understand. 3 days remained before the extraction would resume. 3 days to decide whether he would stand aside and watch Sarah be mentally destroyed for the sake of maintaining his position within a system he was learning to despise. 3 days to discover what kind of being he truly was beneath the conditioning and expectations of his upbringing. As Kepler Prime's twin suns set outside his viewport, painting the flagship's hull in shades of gold and crimson, Zethkar began planning not just for Sarah's salvation, but for something he had never seriously considered before: rebellion. The irony was not lost on him. In trying to break one human spirit, the hegemony had inadvertently awakened his own. Sarah Chun had become more than a strategic asset or even a person he cared about. She had become a catalyst for the most important decision of his life. The question now was whether 3 days would be enough time to find a way to save her without destroying them both in the process. The medical bay where Sarah recovered was a stark white chamber designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Zethkar found her sitting by the small viewport, staring out at the star field with an expression he couldn't read. 2 days had passed since the extraction attempt, and her physical condition had stabilized, but something in her eyes suggested deeper wounds that wouldn't heal so easily. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Like someone took my memories apart and put them back together wrong," Sarah replied without looking away from the stars. "I can remember everything, but some of the connections feel different. Damaged. The medical scans show no permanent neural damage. Medical scans don't measure what it feels like to have your mind invaded, to have your most private thoughts pulled out and examined like specimens." She finally turned to face him. "They saw everything, didn't they? My childhood, my fears, the people I loved who died. Zitkar nodded reluctantly. The extraction process is comprehensive. Do you know what the worst part was? What? For a moment, while they were pulling my memories apart, I felt grateful. Grateful that someone was finally seeing the truth about what happened to Earth. About how hard we fought, how much we lost. Even if it was my enemies looking, at least someone would know we didn't go quietly. The quiet pain in her voice made something twist in Zethkar's chest. Your resistance was noted in the official reports. Sanitized versions, statistics, and tactical analyses. Not the reality of watching children burn while their parents try to shield them from orbital bombardment. Not the desperation of engineers working 20-hour shifts to build weapons they knew couldn't save their world. She stood and walked to the small medical bed, sitting on its edge with exhausted grace. Tomorrow they'll finish the extraction, won't they? Admiral Korithmar has ordered the process to resume once you're fully recovered. Will it kill me? Zethkar considered lying, offering false comfort, but her steady gaze demanded honesty. Possibly. The technicians believe they can complete the extraction safely, but neural interface procedures always carry risks. Sarah nodded, as if she had expected that answer. And if I survive, my knowledge will be used to conquer more worlds. More species will suffer what mine did. Yes. So my choice is between dying uselessly or living as a traitor to everything I believe in. Those aren't your only options. Sarah's eyes sharpened with sudden interest. What do you mean? Zethkar activated the small jamming device that had become routine for their private conversations. What he was about to say would be treasonous by any measure. There may be alternatives to both extraction and execution, such as escape. The single word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Sarah stared at him for several heartbeats before speaking. You're serious. Completely. You're talking about treason. About throwing away everything you've worked for your entire life. I'm talking about preventing my people from using your knowledge to cause more suffering. Sarah's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, hope, suspicion, and something that might have been fear. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Zethkar found himself struggling with an answer that made sense even to himself. Because watching you face impossible choices with courage has made me realize that I've spent my entire life avoiding such choices. Because your willingness to suffer for your principles has shown me that my people's strength comes from causing suffering rather than enduring it. Because, he paused, groping for words to express thoughts he was still discovering. Because you've made me understand that survival without honor is just a slower form of death. Sarah studied his face intently. And what honor is there in helping one human escape while millions of others remain enslaved? None. But sometimes you have to start somewhere with one person, one choice, one act of defiance against a system that treats sentient beings as property. Even if it destroys you. Especially then, they sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the decision settling around them. Finally, Sarah spoke. How would it work? This escape plan of yours. There's a maintenance shuttle docked in Base 7. It's used for external hull repairs and has sufficient range to reach the neutral zone. I have access codes that could get us aboard without triggering security alerts. And then what? The moment we're discovered missing, every hegemony ship in the sector will hunt us down. The shuttle has stealth capabilities designed for covert operations. We could reach the independent colonies beyond hegemony space. Sarah shook her head slowly. They'd never stop looking for us. You're a decorated officer with classified knowledge, and I'm a strategic asset. We'd spend the rest of our lives running. Would that be worse than the alternatives? The question made her pause. For me? No. But for you? Zethkar, you'd be giving up your entire life. Your career, your family, your world. Everything that defines who you are. Perhaps it's time to discover who I am beyond those definitions. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Zethkar deactivated the jamming device and activated the communication panel. Admiral Korithmar's scarred features materialized in a holographic display. Commander, report to my ready room immediately. Bring the human. Yes, sir. As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Sarah moved closer to him. Is this normal? A personal summons this close to the extraction? No. Admiral Korithmar typically delegates such matters to subordinates. A cold suspicion began forming in Zethkar's mind. Something has changed. The Admiral's ready room was more crowded than usual. Besides Korithmar himself, the chamber contained Chief Technician YSKF, Senior Torturer Velkin, and a figure that made Zethkar's blood freeze. Intelligence Director Kelthara, the hegemony's most feared interrogator. Commander Zethkar, Admiral Korithmar began without preamble. Intelligence Director Kelthara has raised concerns about security protocols surrounding our human asset. Kelthara stepped forward, her multiple sensory organs fixing on both Zethkar and Sarah with unsettling intensity. Our monitoring systems have detected irregularities in your interactions with the prisoner, Commander. Extended conversations, emotional responses, and what appears to be the development of personal attachment. I have been gathering intelligence on human psychology to improve extraction efficiency, Zethkar replied carefully. Indeed, and does your research explain why you invoked emergency protocols to halt a critical extraction procedure? The question was a trap. Any answer that suggested concern for Sarah's well-being would confirm Kelthara's suspicions about his reliability. The protocol invocation was based on tactical assessment of resource preservation, Director. A damaged asset provides corrupted intelligence. How pragmatic. Kelthara's tone carried polite disbelief. Unfortunately, recent developments have made your concerns about asset preservation moot. Admiral Korithmar activated a holographic display showing tactical readouts from across hegemony space. 3 hours ago, a human resistance cell attacked supplied Depot 7 in the Centauri system. They used counter-jamming technology nearly identical to what our asset developed during Earth Siege. Sarah's face went pale. That's impossible. I never shared those specifications with anyone. On the contrary, Kelthara interjected. Our analysis suggests that your 3 escape destroyers carried more than just refugees to the outer colonies. They carried complete technical documentation of your innovations. Which means, Admiral Korithmar continued, that extracting information from you is no longer our primary objective. What we need now is to ensure that these resistance technologies cannot be further developed or distributed. The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. They weren't planning to extract Sarah's knowledge. They were planning to eliminate it entirely. And the only way to be certain that her innovations couldn't be replicated was to eliminate her. I see understanding in your expression, Commander, Kelthara observed with satisfaction. Yes, the human's value as an intelligence asset has been superseded by her value as a security risk. She will be terminated within the hour. Sarah stood perfectly still, but Zethkar could see the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her fear. You're going to kill me because my people are still fighting. We're eliminating a strategic threat, Admiral Korithmar corrected. Your innovations have already caused significant damage to hegemony operations. We cannot allow them to spread further. But if you kill her, Zethkar heard himself saying, you lose any possibility of developing countermeasures to the resistance technology. All eyes turned to him. Intelligence Director Kelthara's expression showed dangerous interest. Explain, Commander. The human's knowledge of her own innovations makes her uniquely qualified to identify weaknesses and develop countermeasures. Dead, she provides nothing. Alive and cooperative, she could help us neutralize the Resistance's technological advantages. An interesting perspective, Kelthara mused. However, her cooperation cannot be guaranteed. As we've observed, humans demonstrate remarkable resistance to conventional persuasion. Not all humans, Zethkar replied, the plan crystallizing in his mind as he spoke. This particular human has shown susceptibility to psychological pressure involving the welfare of her surviving people. Properly motivated, she could be made to work against her own species' interests. Sarah's eyes widened with what appeared to be horror and betrayal. But Zethkar caught the subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood he was playing a deeper game. You propose using the other human prisoners as leverage? Admiral Korithmar asked. More than that, sir. I propose using her genuine attachment to their welfare to create lasting cooperation. Allow me to transport both the human and several prisoners back to my estate. In a controlled environment, with proper incentives and consequences clearly established, she could be conditioned to serve our interests willingly. Conditioning implies a long-term investment, Kelthera pointed out. The Admiral has authorization for immediate termination, which would be a waste of valuable assets, Zethkar pressed. Give me 30 days. If I cannot produce useful intelligence and countermeasure technologies, you can proceed with termination then. Admiral Korithmar studied him for several moments. You seem remarkably invested in preserving this asset, Commander. I'm invested in maximizing its strategic value, sir. And if your conditioning efforts fail, if the human proves uncooperative despite your psychological techniques, then I will personally carry out the termination order. The lie came easily, but saying while looking at Sarah required every bit of his command training. Her expression had shifted to something that might have been disappointment or resignation. Fascinating, Intelligence Director Kelthera said. Very well, Commander. You have 30 days to prove the human's value as a cooperative asset. But there will be conditions. Name them. You will submit daily reports on your progress. Any attempt to remove the prisoners from your estate will be considered an escape attempt and met with lethal force. And, most importantly, Kelthera paused dramatically. I will be personally monitoring your efforts. My ship will maintain position in your system throughout the conditioning period. Zethkar felt his carefully constructed plan crumble around him. With Kelthera's ship in the system, any attempt to escape would be detected immediately. Worse, the intelligence director's presence meant constant surveillance that would make private planning impossible. Understood, Director. Excellent. Admiral Korithmar, I believe we can consider this matter settled. Commander Zethkar will transport his assets to Kepler Prime immediately and begin the conditioning process. As the meeting concluded and they were escorted back to the transport bay, Sarah walked beside him in silence. Only when they were alone in the shuttle did she finally speak. That was very convincing back there. For a moment, I almost believed you really intended to turn me into a collaborator. Zethkar activated the shuttle's engines and plotted a course for home. Kelthera's presence complicates matters significantly. Complicates your escape plan, you mean? Yes. Sarah settled into the co-pilot's seat, studying his profile as he worked the controls. There's something you should know about humans, Zethkar. What? We're very good at adapting our plans when circumstances change. Your people learned that lesson on Earth, even if they didn't understand its implications. She was quiet for several minutes as the flagship fell away behind them, and the star field opened up ahead. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note he hadn't heard before, determination mixed with something that might have been hope. 30 days is a long time. Kelthera's surveillance will be focused on preventing our escape, not on what we might accomplish while staying exactly where we're supposed to be. Zethkar felt a chill of understanding. You're suggesting we turn the situation to our advantage. I'm suggesting that if your people want to see what humans are capable of when we're properly motivated, they're about to get a demonstration they'll never forget. As Kepler Prime grew larger in the viewport ahead of them, Zethkar realized that his simple escape plan had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. But, looking at Sarah's determined expression, he found himself believing that 30 days might be enough time after all, not just to save one human, but to strike a blow against the system that had created them both. The estate on Kepler Prime had never felt like a prison before, but with Intelligence Director Kelthera's stealth ship lurking somewhere in the outer system, every room seemed watched, every conversation potentially monitored. Zethkar established Sarah and the other human prisoners, Maria Santos and the young man named Tommy, along with 2 others, in the guest wing, officially for controlled conditioning, but actually to begin planning something unprecedented. The surveillance is comprehensive, but not omnipresent, Sarah observed during their third evening, as they sat in the estate's central garden. She spoke in standard galactic, but used technical terms that would sound like legitimate research to any listening devices. Advanced monitoring requires significant processing power. They can't analyze every word in real time. Agreed, Zethkar replied, following her lead. Optimal conditioning protocols require periods of unsupervised interaction to encourage natural behavioral adaptation. What they were actually discussing was far from conditioning. Over the past 3 days, Sarah had been mapping the estate's security systems, while Zethkar used his access to hegemony networks to gather intelligence on resistance activities throughout known space. The picture emerging was both encouraging and terrifying. The resistance is more widespread than official reports suggest, he had told her that morning while reviewing classified communications. Your people's escape from Earth succeeded in establishing cells across 17 different systems. How many humans total? Difficult to estimate. Official records claim 12 million survivors, but resistance intercepts suggest the number might be significantly higher. Some estimates reach 20 million. Sarah had gone very still at those numbers. 20 million people scattered across hostile space, fighting a war they can't possibly win. Can't they? She had looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I've been analyzing hegemony tactical reports from the past 6 months. Human resistance activities have resulted in a 17% increase in security costs, a 12% reduction in colonial development efficiency, and significant delays in 3 major expansion campaigns. Those are economic impacts, not military victories. In a civilization built on conquest and resource extraction, economic warfare can be more devastating than traditional battles. Your people are making hegemony expansion prohibitively expensive. Now, sitting in the garden with the twin suns setting behind alien trees, they were discussing something that went far beyond escape or resistance. They were planning revolution. The key vulnerability is communications, Sarah said, her voice carrying the careful tone of academic discussion. Hegemony military doctrine relies on rapid coordination across vast distances. Disrupt their command networks, and their tactical advantages disappear. Such disruption would require simultaneous attacks on multiple relay stations across dozens of systems, Zethkar observed. The coordination alone would be unprecedented. Unless someone with access to hegemony command codes could provide targeting information and timing. They looked at each other across the small table, both understanding the magnitude of what they were contemplating. Zethkar wasn't just talking about defection. He was proposing to use his position within the hegemony military to deliver crippling intelligence to human resistance forces. The risks would be enormous, he said quietly. For both of us, Sarah agreed. If we're discovered, Kelthara won't settle for simple execution. We'll face interrogation techniques that make what I experienced on the flagship look gentle. And if we succeed, we might give 20 million humans a real chance at freedom instead of just prolonged resistance. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tommy, the young man who had been tortured on the flagship. His physical injuries were healing, but the psychological damage ran deeper. He approached their table with the careful movement of someone who had learned that any action might trigger punishment. Sarah, he said hesitantly, Maria wants to know if you're really working with them now. Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the young man's haunted face. What do you think, Tommy? I think... He paused, glancing nervously at Zethkar. I think maybe you're planning something they don't expect. Wise boy, Zethkar murmured. What makes you so certain? Tommy's jaw tightened with determination that reminded Zethkar of Sarah's defiance on the auction platform. Because Sarah taught us something during the siege. She said that humans fight differently when they're protecting something instead of just trying to survive. And what are we protecting here? Sarah asked gently. Each other. And everyone else out there who's still fighting. Over the following weeks, what had begun as escape planning evolved into something far more complex. Sarah's knowledge of hegemony technology, combined with Zethkar's access to military networks, created opportunities that neither could have imagined alone. Look at this, Sarah said one evening, showing him technical specifications she had been analyzing. Your fleet communication systems have a fundamental vulnerability. They rely on quantum entanglement networks that can't be physically severed, but they can be disrupted through resonance cascade failures. Zethkar studied the data with growing excitement. If such failures occurred simultaneously across multiple networks, The entire hegemony command structure would lose real-time coordination capability for approximately 18 hours, while emergency protocols restored basic communications. 18 hours would be sufficient for coordinated resistance strikes on dozens of strategic targets. More than sufficient. With proper planning, the resistance could cripple hegemony expansion for years. They worked through the night, developing detailed plans for what Sarah had begun calling Liberation Protocol 7. The number was chosen to honor the 7 human prisoners who had died during transport to prevent their knowledge from being extracted, including Tommy's parents, whose sacrifice he had finally been able to share. The timing has to be perfect, Sarah explained as dawn approached. Every resistance cell across known space needs to strike simultaneously. Communication networks, supply depots, administrative centers, prison facilities, everything at once. Coordinating such an operation would require a command structure the resistance doesn't possess, Zethkar pointed out. It would require someone with access to hegemony military communications who could send untraceable messages to resistance cells. Someone like a decorated fleet commander with appropriate clearance codes. Exactly. They sat in comfortable silence as Kepler Prime's twin suns painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. After 3 weeks of planning, they had developed something that could genuinely threaten hegemony dominance for the first time since the Empire's founding. There's something else, Sarah said softly. Something personal I need to tell you. Zethkar felt his secondary hearts skip. What is it? When I was being tortured on the flagship, when they were pulling my memories apart, there was a moment when I thought I was going to die. And in that moment,